I'm so glad you guys are here in cluster with me. And I just realized we were doing this all day and I'm using the same PowerPoint. I just realized our dates are wrong on this, but that's all right. That's cool.
That is cool.
So we should have all signed in. We should have all done our curriculum check-in and logged our data on the back wall for our high, medium, lows. And we are going to go ahead and jump right into today's cluster. Real quick, just remember we're going to talk about go through these steps in today's cluster. And let's review our norms for our math cluster. Can someone tell me what are our norms for our math cluster?
Bring all materials, be on time, active participation, positive attitude, stay on topic, share best practices, and silence phones.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Miss Laurent. All right, so our ECW cluster rules, only one on here pertains to you guys. Miss Sylvan, can you read what our math cluster goal is?
Yes, by the end of the yearly cluster cycle, all students will meet or exceed learning targets in priority content as evidenced by an academic index of 64.2 through instructional practice.
64.2, you guys have a very high AI coming into this year. So that 64.2 is absolutely awesome. All right, and so before we kind of move on, can someone read to us what our school goal is on the back wall?
By the end of 2018-2019 school year, the overall SPS at ECW will increase from 64.8 to 71.3, representing a 6.5 point growth as measured by the spring 2019 LEAP assessment.
I know 6.5 points seems like a lot, but this past year, Ms. Eldridge, do you remember the exact number we grew by this past year?
In math?
Overall. School. 6 points. Yeah, it was just as high as well. So that is a very reasonable goal for ECW. When you get on the high end or the low end, those goals don't usually seem to be very attainable. But when you're in the middle, in that solid middle, that 6.5 is a very good amount to grow. All right, so based on your exit tickets that you brought with you today and that you charted on the back wall, where are your students at this point? So I want us to think about where are our high students, our medium students, our low students? What is it that these high students, these medium students, these low students, what are they doing or not doing to keep them in that area? Or let's add on to that question with what did they do if you noticed a student change from one to the next? What did they do to push them to that next level?
They used a different strategy. Like I had given them another strategy and they used it instead and it worked better for them.
So they were able to relate to that strategy. They were able to use that and feel comfortable with that strategy.
And that pushed them to the high group? Is that what it? Okay.
Yeah.
This was a unit test, chapter test?
No, it's exit ticket.
Exit ticket.
Yeah, they're doing division.
Well, I think, like my group, it's just a group of 3 for math, and I'm starting to see some progress in them not feeling like they have to do it one certain way, or like the other 2 kids are doing.
Right.
You know, so I would still consider them in the low range, but on the high end of low in for what we're working on.
So they're feeling like what I'm hearing
They're
you
feeling
say
more
is
confident.
they feel like they are more confident because of the options that are
Yes.
given to them.
And the freedom to try different ways.
Yeah, and that's
Student choice.
kind of with the one that moved too.
Thank you, Miss Laurent.
You will.
You know, because they had another option to choose from, you know. And that's another thing we were discussing too when we were talking about division with the kids as well, giving them a different option. We were talking about that this
Yes,
morning.
yeah, we were talking about 2 different, so in Miss McAllister's class I was sitting in this morning, students were dividing 3 digit by 2 digits, and they were they started with estimation yesterday. They were estimating the quotients yesterday, and we talked about how they needed to have that option. Well, you could estimate, or we could just straight multiply to see how we can divide, that sort of thing. And the little guy that was sitting next to me, I can't remember his name, he told me, oh, that makes more sense to start multiplying in the margin, huh? It's like, yeah, you'll end up multiplying those margins will be full of multiplication problems. Right? Anything else?
Well, for my high ones, there are multiple parts of the problem, so the high ones answered every part and showed all their work.
That's such a big,
Mm-hmm.
that's such a big thing, and I've been working on that a lot because the kids tend to get excited when there's a part they know, and then in their mind, I'm done.
Yeah.
It's
You know,
true.
and not going back and saying, okay, what else do I need to answer?
Right. I see that a lot too.
Mhm.
You're right.
Ms. G, do you see anything in any of your students?
Well, I see that we're struggling with long division the standard way, but they do understand arrays. So I see that they're drawing arrays to represent that, again, choosing an option. We only seen standard way one time. Some of them, but they don't know where to write the quotient or what to take away, so.
It's a step.
But
if you
yes.
think back, so the three of you would have been in the same Eureka thing this past PD. And if you think back to the one prior to that, where we, because they brought it up to Michelle and I, they used the same problem that we used in our Eureka PD, where it was, the kid had 12 flowers and divided into 3 rows, and he added 2 flowers for each row. Do you guys remember that question? And we noticed what the kid was able to do. The kid was able to multiply 12 times 3 to get 36. And the kid was able to divide 36 divided by 12 to get 3. But the kid didn't, what was it, Miss
It was
Laurent?
the concept of the problem itself was,
Drawing that many rows and that
well,
many.
it was supposed to be 12.
He could
So
do
3 times
arrays.
4 should have been 12 instead of the, they were taking the numbers, and it was the verbiage. We found out that reading the problem, we actually got a little confused on what they were asking, because there was no question, it just told them to model. So the kid just saw the numbers and multiplied those instead of actually, it was supposed to be 3 rows of 4 or something
Right.
like that.
It was 12 total, but the kids took it as, well, this is 12 times 3, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
do 3 rows with 12 in each row.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any ahas that you realized after looking at your data? Anything else we can add to this? What is something that you went, oh my goodness, this works or this doesn't work? Ms. Sullivan?
I was surprised because the kids seem to be having a lot of trouble with subtraction lately. 3-digit subtraction. 2-digit, they're fine. Add another digit.
Just that one
A
digit,
lot
right?
of it is up here, when they see
Yeah.
more, it
Mhm.
really freaks
Say
them
some
out.
word problems or anything.
Because that's what we're doing.
So-
Each day we add another digit as we're going through this, and it's like.
Like, the 4 digits, I'm bracing myself.
It's
It's like when it gets to that 3rd digit, they just toss numbers around. It's just like they give up. Even the students who are higher or kind of middle, they're like Brian is pretty sharp, and class participation, he gets them all right. He gets it immediately. Exit tickets, he just tanks. And I'm not sure.
You think it's just in their head, Ms. Sylvan? Because if they can do 2-digit, they should be able to do 3 or whatever. So you think they're just not they haven't had a whole lot of exposure to it?
I don't know. We do a lot of practice problems, like problem sets in the class.
Mm-hmm.
And we go over the homework, and I go step by step. I wondered if I was confusing them too much, but anyway, we go step by step. Brian is always first one with the hand up. He
Right.
does it quickly in his head, but when to get it on paper, I don't know if he's rushing
Could be.
or it's one of those kids who just doesn't test well. But his exit tickets don't show what he's doing in the classroom.
What kind of mistakes?
Small.
What kind of mistakes?
Very small
So
mistakes.
he's rushing through.
So-
Like decomposing and borrowing, he's forgetting to take the one away and, well, when he
Yeah.
decomposes the tens place, he's forgetting to, oh, I decomposed that, so I have to subtract it 7 minus 4 instead of 8 minus 4. But he does it correctly in the ones place.
And believe it or not, I'm a voucher, I'm sure that's what you're thinking too. As a middle school teacher, that is the biggest issue. The kids always they know they're gonna put one to borrow, but they don't realize you can't just have one flying around the air. You have to take it from somewhere first.
Right.
So teaching them that method, maybe like, where are you taking it from? You
Right.
can't just come out of the
Wow.
sky.
Right.
You know, I'm telling you, middle schools still get that wrong.
Oh,
So I'm gonna piggyback off of what Miss Laurent was saying, and it's on the tip of my tongue, because Marissa in second grade, is working on that same concept right now with hers. And what, 22 or 27 minus 9. And it's that borrowing issue. So what we've decided to try in third grade, which she and I sat down and she went home and made all this stuff last night. Oh, bless her. But we sat down and came up with the strategy of, she took her color tiles that we have in those boxes of those manipulatives. Different colors represent hundreds, tens, and ones. And when they borrow that 10, they have to trade it for 10 ones. When they're borrowing from that 100, they're going to trade it for 10 tens.
Which will help them when they get to me.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's
Because that's the first thing we
And
do
it
the
builds
first
that whole
couple
number
weeks.
sense, because that's, we can teach children how to calculate all we want,
But
but if
why?
they don't understand,
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
what's the purpose? Yeah.
And so she and I talked about this, and we're going to keep trying this. And hopefully those high and those higher medium students are going to be the ones to go, I don't need to borrow anymore. I know that this 2 is now going to be 12. I know that's going to be that way.
Right.
So that's where I want you, give her a couple of days, Miss Sylvan, and then let's go in to Miss Voros's room and see how that's working for her. Because she's just starting it today during a homework practice that they're doing during her EI time. What's that time? IE time. Yeah.
And you know, I'm thinking, because they did very well the first 9 weeks. So in my head, I'm like, okay, they got this. So I'm thinking, oh, subtraction, okay, we can fly through this lesson.
That's where you went wrong.
What's
assume.
happening? You know,
Never assume.
I have an aha moment before we go on.
Oh, please.
Even though they're struggling with that long division, they're checking their answers right
Oh
and
my.
adding their remainders. I'm just so
Yay!
excited because
That's
last
huge.
year,
That
yes,
is.
and they did not get that last year. Like I didn't get that.
Well, I'm
was
gonna
good.
tell you, I saw it in Miss McAllister's room, and I saw it today, and we had some misconceptions about what to do, and we had to go back over. She had to go completely back over and explain to the kids, don't just write them down. Because one kid wrote remainder 7, and I think the kid actually wrote 4 on the bottom, but just thought it was a 7.
Well, the thing is, a lot of them are wanting to do that check, but the reason for the check is to check to make sure you have the right answer. It's not just the copy because you know this answer is going to be here and this answer is what you should have at the end. You need to do the work, and I tell them, do the work, do the work. So hopefully, we're drilling it into them, do the work.
All right, so last week we talked about scaffolding questions in the concept development. Today we're going to talk about student misconceptions during our debrief. And next week we're going to go ahead and dive into an analysis of our interims. Ms. Laurent hopefully will get your issue.
Taken care of.
Well, Ms. Davis did ask me to tell her to please email Dr.
We've
Carroll.
done
I did this
All
morning,
three
but
of
as
us
soon
did.
as school was getting ready to start and I was doing an observation, it worked. So pray, keep my
Oh,
fingers crossed
alright.
that after school,
But-
I can get them done.
And the problem is, it worked for me too yesterday.
Yes.
And then when I went back in it didn't work, so it's.
Yeah, so
Okay.
keep my fingers crossed.
All right, please let me know if it
I will.
doesn't. All right. In our cluster last week, we were scaffolding questions for the concept development. So how did last week's cluster and you scaffolding questions in your concept development, how did that impact your student learning for this week? How did that change anything in your classroom?
Well, I think finding where they're gonna get tripped up and creating those questions based off of those things, and hitting those questions throughout the lesson. I think that helped a couple of low ones because I kept asking the questions and I kept, reiterating it. And of course, you gotta tweak them during the lesson, cause then sometimes they surprise you and actually understand the question you thought they'd get tripped up on. And so you have
And
to
vice
change it.
versa.
Right,
Mhm.
exactly. So, I think it helps, especially with the lower ones. If they keep hearing it, especially math vocabulary, if input that into the questions, they wanna say those words back to you in an answer, so I think it's really changed.
I don't know if I'm correct in what I'm understanding with the scaffolding the questions, but this is how I see it. More questions, more students answering the questions, more points of view. Kids getting hearing from different kids, cause I noticed, the more questions I ask, of course, the more kids I'm calling on, and I would hear same, Keyshawn, he would go,
Right.
oh.
Yeah.
When another kid would say their point of view or how they understand it, and then I would hear Malik go, oh.
I love it when I hear that.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I
right.
okay, I need to start.
I love
keep
it when I
asking.
hear that.
And that's good because they can hear each other's
Yes, they
really do.
views and how they think about it, and it goes back to what we were saying before, is it's not all, it's not just one way all the time, you can think of it different ways
Right.
even.
Right.
And again, you could say something and a kid in this classroom can say the exact same thing to somebody and they're not gonna get it from you.
Yes.
But they're gonna get it from that student, even though they're just repeating exactly what you said, not even paraphrasing it.
And the good thing about that, I had a student last year, he created a whole different method to solve a Pythagorean theorem problem with a three-dimensional shape that I never even thought of. So I kept calling it the Raekwon method, and it's like, it was just, and it made him feel
Right.
good, and cause it's like, I never thought of that. So for him to have a student method that I didn't even think of as an adult, he loved that. So.
Sharon does that a lot, she comes up with different ways on it. And then other kids get it, that way.
And then are you allowing them
yeah.
to share that with the rest of the class?
Oh, yes,
Perfect.
that's it.
Perfect.
And
And
I think-
somebody else might understand it that way. I'm sorry, Miss
Oh,
Landry.
It's all right, I think that they enjoy, even if you're faking it sometimes, they enjoy the teacher getting a eureka moment. Like,
Yes.
oh, that's a great, yeah, I didn't even think about doing it that way, that's cool,
Can you hear that kid going home and telling it
Yes.
their mom or daddy?
I
I
had to
taught
teach
my
the
teacher
teacher."
something today.
Oh, yes.
All right, so by the end of today's cluster meeting, career teachers will annotate the student debrief, resulting in an increase in student achievement as measured by student work. So when we're saying we're annotating that student debrief, what we're doing is we're going into that student debrief and we are focusing on those questions, picking those questions that are in that debrief for 3-5 and for 6-8. We're gonna make sure we look at our closure and find those questions in there. Being our closure in middle school it basically says, have a student summarize today's lesson. So we're gonna find those questions that will really get the biggest bang for our buck for our students' understanding of that skill and that mastery. Again, just like last week, we're gonna plan with that intentional focus. Everything is intentional, because if we're just planning to plan, we're not doing any good, we're not showing any results. All right, so let's talk about this real quick. How does that student debrief, that closure, how does that relate to our exit ticket, our priority standard, and our mid and end of year module assessments? How does that student debrief or closure relate to these things? How does it relate to the exit ticket, which then in turn relates to that priority standard, in turn the mid and end of modules?
Are you asking us?
I'm
sorry.
asking, yes. Sorry.
Sorry, I thought.
Sorry if that wasn't clear. Yes, I am asking. I want.
Rhetorical?
That's me. Oops.
Well, I mean,
It kind of sets them up for, it gives a summary of the lesson you just taught, but, you also kind of like can embed something that maybe the future learning is gonna happen, or maybe even give a relatable problem that's gonna be seen on mid and end of module. So maybe like, okay, like this would also relate to shopping at a store, or something like that. to
So
get them
Miss
to relate.
Laurent, if you were doing 8th grade or 7th grade, you were talking about unit rate, constant of proportionality, we can relate that to the
Slope.
8 other things that it's
Yeah.
called throughout math. If you're talking about your 7th grade, doing your discounts and your markups and your, why don't we relate that to some real life? Like you're going to a restaurant, if you can't afford to tip, well, we need to figure out a tip before we can decide if we can afford to eat there.
Right.
Yeah. And in 5th grade, we're doing some division. So how,
Well, I mean, moving on to things that they're gonna be doing, like I gave an example of what we've already done that's helped us to get to this point, and having that, like you said, relate to where you're going. So it's what I've done, where I'm at, where I'm going. I mean, and I told them it all ties together. It's like a house, it builds. So.
and like you said before, adding a digit a day.
Yes.
And you know what's gonna help too, if you're looking to see how it will tie in and you're not sure, that coherence.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. That coherence map, if you guys have not spent time on it, please go check it out. Especially, so Miss McAllister and I have been talking, and I see that she's using it every day I've walked in there. The kids have something on their desk for it, and I love that. She's trying to find some gaps in her class, some gap skills. And working on trying to find those gap skills, what we thought about doing was pulling that coherence map wherever we are now. Let's go back to the prior year to see if that's that gap skill. And so if she's in grade 5, we may have 4 grade 4s that pop up, but let's go ahead and do that assessment for each of those to find out if that is that exact, if that is that skill. And it may not be 4th grade, she may have to go back to 2nd grade to find that gap skill.
Well, and then just what Ms. G, to piggyback on what you said, Ms. G just said she's still using the array model for division, and they're getting that, so she's using the standard form, so that could be in that coherence map. Some of your students might need to go back and see that method.
2nd grade, 3rd grade needs to go back to that place value chart.
Yes.
Right.
So they're all building on each other. All of these skills, all of these strategies are building on each other to get us to where we are in 5th grade. Well, technically, to get us where we end up in 8th grade.
And if we can sometimes, if we can fill that gap wherever it is, everything else will start falling into place, because
It's like
then
dominoes.
it'll all make sense.
It's like a big, a whole bunch of dominoes. They'll all end up making sense.
will.
That's my hope.
Cause I had one student who recognized that the other day, a number bond. He's like, oh, I remember doing this in 2nd grade. So they're pulling that back, and they were, at least how to set it up. They might have forgotten little bitty things, but the gist of
And
it,
that's
they
a group
understand it.
that, maybe it was a group after that. They just really started doing all the number bonds and everything with that group when they were in the lower grades.
Yes.
So I think the teachers weren't as maybe sold on it
Mm-hmm.
and as confident in it. And maybe it shows.
Right.
That's just a kind of a theory with that,
Yes.
All right. So if we are identifying our need, I want to set today's purpose. So as a result of today's new learning, teachers will have a process for planning for mastery in each lesson with annotating our debrief or our closure. And so our connection to our Big 12 today is using our teacher content, our teacher knowledge of students, and more importantly, if we want to be very specific, well, let me ask you guys, according to the rubric, which are these 3 pieces of that teacher knowledge of students, where do you think this fits in the most? Where do you think it fits in the most today's? I'm sorry, Michelle.
No, you're good.
Over
I'm good.
so that everybody can see, but I know it's kind of hard.
I'm thinking the first one.
That's where I was
Okay.
leaning toward too.
Okay, so teacher
Were we wrong?
practices display understanding. Teacher practices display understanding of some student anticipated learning difficulties. I could understand.
I'm thinking of planning.
I can agree with that. As I see that point as well. What we're really focusing on is we are actually focusing
The last
on
one.
teacher sometimes, yes, provides differentiated instructional methods and content to ensure children have the opportunity to master what's being taught. And you guys said this here. When we went back, you guys mentioned it when you're talking about student choice. Your students, your low students have more confidence because they're allowed that choice. Even our middle of the road children, when you're giving them that choice to use a strategy that they learned before that makes sense for them, they are able to connect it. And the students are comfortable with the strategies. And it's building that confidence within our kids to truly see that difference being made. All right. So let's take a look at the process that was used to plan for mastery in the class and student work. And so our ultimate goal, our ultimate question right now that we're going to answer today is, why is it important to annotate student debrief to impact students' achievement? Why is it important to annotate that student debrief? So think about, how can teachers plan for success for all students? What if teachers were intentional about choosing questions from the debrief that will clear up any misconceptions? And so 3-5 teachers, this is perfect for you guys. We're going to think about this. Ms. Laurent, in the closing, I want you to think about questions that you can come up with for your students. Because your middle school closing, every single lesson says, have a student summarize. So what if that student is missing a piece of that summary? So what are some questions you as the teacher can come up with to help that student? All right, and how would these questions actually impact that student achievement of the lesson objective? So let's keep that in mind while we're talking about this. So on your paper, I gave you the process for today. The process, we are first going to revisit your exit tickets. That's step 1. Step 2 is to revisit your must-do problems. Step 3 is to annotate the concept development. Step 4 is to read and annotate the student debrief/closure. And step 5 is to determine the essential questions that enable students to meet mastery of the learning target. Do we use essential questions in our lesson every single day here? Yes, this is what we start our lesson with in our classroom. But how do you get those essential questions? And so we need to make sure that we are going through these steps to get the essential questions that are actually essential in our classroom, and not just coming up with something that makes it sound good, make that objective sound good. So we have done steps 1, 2, 3 already, where we have revisited, we've gone to our exit ticket, we've revisited our must-do problems, we've annotated our concept development, and now we are here on annotating the student debrief. So the student debrief right here gives us that lesson objective already, where we are multiplying 2-digit multiples of 10 by 2-digit numbers using a place value chart. So it's not going to let me annotate on here. But using that place value chart, so we talked about this, that place value chart being so important, and it never goes away. It never goes away. But think about how much we would better understand it if we were taught it that way.
Yes.
I agree.
And I keep going back to that second grade skill of borrowing that Ms. Boros is teaching, and just, it makes sense. It makes sense. All right, so the student debrief is intended to invite reflection and active processing for the total lesson experience. When we talked about our ECW best practices, one of the things we put on here was that reflection piece. This is where that reflection piece comes into our lesson, that reflection in that student debrief. So it then says to invite students to review their solutions for the problem set. They should check work by comparing answers with a partner before going over answers as a class. You did that great today, Ms. McAllister. You let the kids work independently, then they checked their work together, and then you guys talked about it as a whole class. Look for misconceptions or misunderstandings that can be addressed in the debrief, and guide students in a conversation to debrief the problem set, the process, and process the lesson. So any combination of questions below may be used to lead the discussion. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions. There's no way I'm going to be able to ask 7 questions and get some good reflection. So I need to figure out which of these 7 would lead my students into better mastering that objective. So it says in problem 1A, is it best to model 30 or 24 on the chart initially and why? I'm at the end of this problem set. They may not remember what they did in problem 1A. I'm going to put a question mark next to that one because I'm not really positive yet. And so the second one, tell your partner how you use the associative property in problem 3A. Is there an order you find easier for multiplying the three factors, like when multiplying using the place value chart? Okay. I like that they're having that student interaction, that student-to-student accountable talk. And so this is a great possibility for me. This one might come in handy with my students, with me and my students. So why was it helpful to break the multiple of 10 into two factors before solving? Ooh, that's a good one because that kind of links to a few different other things that happen. Then we have compare problems 3A and 4A. Why did you get the same answer by using two different methods? Those choices. What does this tell you about the associative and distributive property? And compare their processes. How are they different? That distributive property never goes away. So we have to make sure we drill every time we see it.
What grade is this, fourth?
Fourth grade. So how did representing the multiplication with disc help you solve and understand the multiplication? That's another good one. That's giving that conversation. That's really seeing if we can get those, if the students can actually verbalize what they're understanding, what they're doing. So how did the application problem connect to today's lesson? In today's lesson in 5th grade, it was so many ounces, and we had to figure out how much the baby weighed in pounds and ounces. So it was a conversion thing, but we were dividing, which is what today's lesson was. So let's take a look at what I pulled out, what I thought would be to help clear up the problem. So in problem 1A, is it best to model 30 or 24 on the chart initially, and why? I also chose to compare problems 3A and 4A, and why did you get the same answer by using two different methods? And what does this tell you about the associative and distributive property? I chose both of these because I really think it gets the students really digging deeper into what they're actually doing. Why are they doing a certain skill? And again, this associative and that distributive property never ever goes away. We use that through Algebra 2, so we truly need to understand it now. All right, and then how did representing the multiplication with the disc? Again, we want them to be able to better verbalize their understanding, because if they're able to write down or to at least tell you why they're able to do something, it helps them understand that better. So those were, and then how did the application problem connect to today's lesson? Those were the 4 problems I chose in this particular lesson. And tomorrow, we are going to go in and take a look at your next lesson for either Thursday or Friday. So please bring with you the lesson for Thursday or Friday with that student debrief, so we can go in and choose which questions we will ask our students on that next lesson. And Michelle, I know you don't have that student debrief, but have your lesson so that we can choose some from that closure.
Well, they have closing. That's what I usually use.
Okay.
Closing.
All right. So tomorrow, what are you going to bring with you?
The next lesson.
The next lesson. All right. Any questions about today's lesson? Right, before you go, if you would so kindly turn in your Wilds and Wonders sheet to me before you go, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Good job, Matt cluster.
Thank you.
They are such an awesome cluster.
I'm just substituting and